The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the sea was already restless. That morning, a weary veteran named Michael stepped off a rusted boat, his loyal German shepherd buddy close behind. Everyone else in his family got the houses, the money, the land. He got a lighthouse, broken, forgotten, wrapped in fog. Why would a dying man give that lonely place to the one soldier his family had turned away? What secret sleeps beneath those waves? And what did the dog sense before any human could? Before this storm ends, you'll discover what they found out there, and why some lights refuse to die, no matter how dark the sea becomes. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. The morning air hung heavy with salt and fog, the kind that blurs the line between sea and sky. The gulls cried overhead like restless ghosts, and the gray harbor smelled of iron and rain. The world felt damp, suspended in half-light, the color of old pewter. One of those mornings when even the waves seemed hesitant to breathe. Michael Croft stood on the weathered dock, the sea breathing quietly at his feet. His hands, still faintly stained with grease from the night shift at the dockyard, gripped the wooden railing. Engines he could fix. Lives, his own included, were a different story. At 47, he carried himself with the quiet composure of a man used to both noise and silence. His hazel-brown hair was cropped short, threaded with early silver. A thin beard followed the shape of a jaw, once square, but now softened by exhaustion. His blue-gray eyes had the weary calm of someone who had seen storms break and mend again. A veteran of the Navy, Michael had spent half his life listening to the sea's moods, and the other half trying to forget them. Beside him sat Buddy, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat that gleamed faintly under the fog. He was strong and lean, his amber eyes sharp and intelligent, his ears tilting subtly to the sounds of distant gulls. No leash, no need. Buddy had been with Michael since the end of his last deployment overseas. The dog's instincts had saved him once, in a desert far from any ocean, and the bond between them had grown into something that required no words. The letter in Michael's pocket had arrived 3 days ago. Heavy parchment, folded twice. The ink faded slightly around the edges. It bore the seal of Sterling and Associates, a law firm older than most of the harbor's ships. Its message had been brief. Mr. Julian Croft, deceased, has named you as beneficiary to property known as Gullbone Light. Attendance requested for reading of the will. Julian Croft, his uncle, had been the last of the old generation, a man with rough hands and a habit of teaching by silence. Julian had been the only family member who ever visited Michael after the war, bringing coffee to the docks and saying things like, "You can't fix what's gone, but you can keep the lights burning." Now the man was gone, and the lights, literal or not, had been passed on. The courthouse stood uphill, pale and stiff against the fog. The family had gathered voluntarily. The lawyer had merely sent invitations, but of course they came. Evan and Marjorie would never miss a performance where they were the stars. Inside, the air smelled of waxed floors and old paper. The ticking of a clock echoed like dripping water. Mr. Sterling, the family lawyer, sat at the head of the long oak table. He was thin and pale, his silver hair slicked into submission, his voice dry as parchment. "Let us proceed," he said, glancing briefly at Michael before adjusting his glasses. "As executor of Julian Croft's estate, I will read his final will and testament." Evan and Marjorie Croft were already seated together, whispering behind folded hands. Evan was in his late 30s, round-faced and smug, his hair a neat shell of pomade. Marjorie, a few years older, carried herself like a woman, constantly posing for a photograph. Her lipstick was too bright for mourning, her smile too sharp for sympathy. They both nodded politely at Michael, mock politeness, brittle and rehearsed. Buddy settled at Michael's boots, silent and watchful. When the lawyer began, the dog's ears twitched at every unfamiliar voice. First, Sterling read, "The residence on Beacon Street, along with its adjoining lots and furnishings, shall pass jointly to Mr. Evan Croft and Miss Marjorie Croft." Evan gave a soft exhale of satisfaction, pretending to look humble. "A fair division," he said under his breath. "The remaining company shares of Croft Maritime Holdings," Sterling continued, "shall also be divided between them equally." Marjorie tilted her chin, basking in invisible applause. Then came the pause. The lawyer's tone shifted slightly, eyes lowering to the last page. To Mr. Michael Croft, he said, is bequeathed ownership of Gullbone Light, the lighthouse located on the outer shoal of Port Clyde, and all structures contained upon it. For a moment, only the clock ticked. Evan broke the silence with a laugh. The lighthouse? That old ruin? Oh, Uncle Julian had quite the sense of humor. Marjorie covered her smirk with a gloved hand. Maybe he thought you'd finally settle down. Find peace with all that solitude. But Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. He lifted a small folded note, his voice softening. A personal message accompanies the inheritance. To the one who understands the value of silence. Keep the light. Buddy gave a low sound under the table, not a growl, more like a sigh, as if he sensed the cruelty in the room. Michael's eyes flicked toward the lawyer, then the note. The words carried weight. Julian had known him too well. Silence was something Michael had lived with, both weapon and wound. It was silence that had kept him alive in the war, and silence that had kept him apart ever since. Evan snorted. Poetic. Shame he didn't leave you a house to go with it. Michael stood, slow and steady. You two enjoy your winnings, he said evenly. I'll take the silence. The lawyer gave a subtle nod of respect. Outside, the fog had thickened, wrapping the harbor in gauze. The air tasted metallic. Behind him, he could still hear the faint laughter of his cousins echoing down the marble hallway like seagulls picking at scraps. That night, Michael packed what little he owned. Some clothes, a toolbox, a thermos, Buddy's food. He loaded the old pickup until it groaned under the weight of his life, then drove toward the pier before dawn. The ferry had long been decommissioned, but there was an Ewite old fisherman who still took private fares. Jed Callahan was waiting for him, a man in his 60s, thick-shouldered and salt-streaked, with eyes the gray of wet rope. His sweater looked older than the boat he stood beside. You're the Croft boy, he said, squinting through the mist. Julian talked about you sometimes, said you were the kind who could hear a storm before it started. Maybe, Michael replied. I'm just here to keep the light. Jed grunted, motioning to his boat, a wooden motor skiff with peeling paint and the smell of diesel. She's no beauty, but she floats. Fog's light today. You'll make it to Gullbone before tide turns. As they pushed off, the harbor fell away behind them. The water stretched out like steel, smooth and endless. Buddy stood at the bow, ears forward, tail stiff, a soldier on watch. The engine hummed low, a heartbeat against the silence. Time blurred, the fog shifted, and through its veil rose the silhouette of Gullbone Light. The tower stood tall and worn, its white paint flaked, its lantern glass clouded. It looked like an old soldier, too, scarred, stubborn, still standing because it refused not to. When they docked, Michael stepped onto the slick stones. The wind pushed faintly through the mist, carrying the sharp tang of salt. Doesn't look like much, Jed said, lighting a cigarette, but she's seen more storms than any man alive. Michael looked up at the lighthouse, its peak lost in fog. Then she and I will get along fine. He and Buddy climbed the stone path, boots echoing faintly. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of salt and iron, damp and old. The narrow stair wound upward, disappearing into shadow. Buddy sniffed the floor, then the base of the stairs, as if recognizing something unseen. Michael's gaze fell on a brass plaque near the entryway, the letters dulled but legible. In light we guard, in silence we endure. He touched it lightly. Guess he really meant it, he murmured. Buddy sat beside him, tail brushing against the stone. Outside, the fog began to shift. Through the mist, the first pale shaft of sunlight reached the tower's lantern. Dust motes swirled through the beam like tiny ghosts waking after a long sleep. Michael stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching the light flicker alive for the first time in years. For a brief moment, he felt something unfamiliar. Purpose. Not the duty of war, nor the grind of work, but the kind of purpose that asked nothing but presence. He turned to Buddy and smiled faintly. Let's see what you left us, old man. The lantern turned, slow and steady, sweeping across the gray horizon. And for the first time in a very long while, Michael Croft felt like a man standing watch again. The fog over Gullbone Light clung to everything like damp breath, soft yet smothering. The tide had turned during the night, leaving slick ribbons of kelp and driftwood strewn along the rocks. When Michael stepped outside at dawn, his boots sank into the wet moss. The lighthouse loomed above him, a ribcage of iron and stone, its cracked lens glinting faintly in the pale sun. Beside him, Buddy prowled silently, nose twitching, fur silvered by mist. The air smelled of rust, salt, and something older, like time itself decaying. Michael had spent his first night sleeping on the floor of the keeper's quarters, wrapped in an old blanket that smelled faintly of engine oil. The wooden walls creaked like a restless ship, every sound magnified by solitude. He woke several times, unsure whether the faint tapping came from wind, water, or memory. His mind still ran in patterns trained by war, listening for danger in every shift of sound. That morning, he fixed the door hinges and patched a leaking pipe. The rhythm of repair steadied him. His hands, still marked by dock grease, worked with quiet precision. Engines, gears, and bolts, those made sense. People rarely did. He was tightening a valve when Buddy began sniffing near the old desk by the window. The German shepherd's body went rigid, ears forward. Then came the low, almost reverent whine, the sound he made when he'd found something that mattered. Michael wiped his hands and crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" Buddy's paws pressed against the floorboards, claws scraping at a loose plank. The wood was darker there, warped by years of damp. He pried at it with a screwdriver, the nails groaning free, until a hollow space yawned open beneath. Inside lay a wrapped bundle, oilcloth tied with twine, dry despite the moisture all around. He lifted it out carefully. Within were several small notebooks, their covers dark and stiff with salt. The handwriting inside was neat, deliberate. Julian Croft, his uncle's name. The first entry was dated nearly 20 years earlier. They said, "Isolation breeds madness, but I say it breeds truth." Another line, "The sea hums at night, not wind, not waves. Something deeper. The fog amplifies it, makes the rocks sing." Michael frowned. He could almost hear it himself. The faint vibration beneath the wind, like the distant pulse of machinery or a heartbeat muffled by stone. He read for hours, the fog outside thickening, until the world seemed reduced to lamplight and the dogs breathing. Julian's notes grew stranger. Sketches of wave frequencies, descriptions of voices in the mist that seemed to call his name. But buried between the oddities were pages of engineering precision, measurements, equations, notes on sonar resonance. His uncle hadn't been losing his mind. He'd been studying something, listening. By late afternoon, fatigue crept in. Michael rubbed his eyes and stood, stretching his sore back. Buddy stirred at the sudden creak of the floor. Then came a sound that froze them both, a knock. 3 sharp raps against the outer door, impossible to mistake for wind. His hand moved automatically to the knife on his belt. Reflex, not reason. For a heartbeat, he wasn't in Maine, but back in Kandahar, crouched behind a broken wall, waiting for the door to blow. He forced himself to breathe. The knocks came again, lighter this time, human. He approached carefully, one step at a time, Buddy at his side. When he opened the door, the fog outside swirled to reveal a figure in a heavy navy coat. A woman. Her hood was down, revealing a narrow, freckled face framed by wet strands of chestnut hair. Her green eyes were clear and steady, the kind that belonged to someone who worked with precision. "Michael Croft?" she asked. Her voice carried easily through the mist. "I'm Sarah Doyle, Maine Coastal Survey. I radioed from the harbor yesterday, but I'm guessing your transmitter's dead." She smiled faintly, unbothered by his guarded stare. Michael blinked, still half expecting her to vanish like the fog itself. "Survey? What are you doing out here?" She tapped the waterproof case slung over her shoulder. "Your uncle registered this lighthouse as an acoustic monitoring site. The department's been picking up strange signals for months, old rhythmic pulses coming from beneath the ledge. My team thought it was a malfunction, but the frequency matches Cold War sonar arrays. I came to check the equipment." Her explanation clicked something into place. The notebooks, the equations, the diagrams. Julian hadn't just been a keeper. He'd been guarding something that listened. Michael stepped aside. "You'd better come in, before the sea decides otherwise." Inside, Sarah glanced around the cluttered room. "Looks like you've got your work cut out for you," she said, brushing mist from her sleeves. She moved with calm confidence, a woman accustomed to rough conditions. Her fingers were lean and scarred from handling instruments instead of jewelry. Buddy sniffed her boots, tail low, but not unfriendly. Sarah crouched, meeting his gaze. "And who's this?" "Buddy," Michael said simply. "He came with the inheritance." She smiled. "Looks like he's earned his keep already." Michael showed her the notebooks. She leafed through them, eyebrows rising. "This isn't random. These are frequency maps. Your uncle was mapping subsonic patterns along the continental shelf." "You think he found something?" "I think," she said softly, "he heard something." The room fell silent except for the ticking of a forgotten clock. Sarah traced a finger along one of the hand-drawn waveforms. "This pattern, it's not seismic, not biological. Could be mechanical, but old." She looked up, her expression shifting. "Mr. Croft, did your uncle ever mention working with the Navy?" Michael hesitated. "He was an engineer before he retired, didn't talk about it much." "Then this makes sense." She tapped the page. "These are SOSUS readings, early acoustic surveillance. He must have kept a listening post here after the project ended." The revelation hit like a quiet explosion. All those nights Julian spent alone in the fog, he hadn't been haunted. He'd been on watch. They worked side by side until dusk, tracing notes, checking the corroded wiring near the old radio set. Outside, the fog pressed tighter, and the low hum Michael had dismissed earlier deepened. A vibration felt more than heard. Buddy lifted his head, ears pricked toward the stone floor. Sarah noticed it too. "Do you feel that?" He nodded. "Like the sea's breathing." They followed the sound to the base of the spiral stairs leading down to the lower generator room. The metal steps groaned under their weight. Buddy descended first, tail stiff. The air grew cooler, metallic, and faintly sweet. The smell of ozone. At the bottom lay a heavy door, half swallowed by rust. The hum was stronger there, pulsing through the stone. "Power source," Sarah guessed. "Or something worse," Michael muttered. The latch wouldn't budge. They'd need tools and daylight, and maybe courage. They climbed back up as the wind rose outside, fog turning gold around the lantern glass. Sarah stood by the window, studying the horizon. "Storm rolling in," she murmured. Michael nodded. "Seems like they always are." Buddy lay at his feet, gaze fixed on the floorboards, as if listening to the heartbeat of the earth itself. The notebooks lay open on the table, their inked lines trembling under the shifting light. As the fog swallowed the world again, Michael whispered to Buddy, "Then we'll keep the light, for him." Outside, somewhere deep beneath the waves, the unseen hum pulsed once more, slow, deliberate, almost human. The morning after the storm broke was eerily calm. The sea stretched outward like tarnished glass, the air thick with the scent of brine and wet metal. The fog had retreated to a thin white halo circling the horizon, leaving Goulbone light washed in pale gold. Michael stood at the lighthouse's edge, mug of bitter coffee in hand, staring down at the jagged rocks below. The storm had stripped away years of moss and debris, revealing deep cracks that seemed to breathe with the sea. Beside him, Buddy sniffed along the railing, ears alert, tail sweeping back and forth in quiet rhythm. Sarah was already awake, hair tied messily beneath her cap, her expression focused. The night's sleep, or what little they had done little to soften her sharpness. She was the kind of woman whose mind never rested, always sorting, calculating, fixing. She crouched by the generator, sleeves rolled up, the small scar across her wrist catching the morning light. "The lines are intact," she murmured, half to herself. "But the current shouldn't be this steady. There's something still feeding power from below." Michael set his mug down beside her. "Below?" She nodded, eyes narrowing. "It doesn't match wind power. Julian must have built a substation, something that cycles with the tides. Ingenious if it's still running after all these years." She glanced at him, then at Buddy, who had stopped sniffing and now stood completely still, nose pointed toward the rocks below the cliff. His fur bristled slightly. Michael followed his gaze. "You see something, boy?" Buddy gave a low whine, that same tone he'd made when finding the hidden journal. Without waiting, he trotted toward the edge, his paws steady even on the slick stone. Michael and Sarah exchanged a glance, then followed carefully. The wind carried a faint tang of rust and seaweed. At the cliff's base, a narrow crevice split the rock, a wound in the earth just wide enough for a man to crawl through. The stone around it was stained darker than the rest, streaked by generations of saltwater spray. Sarah knelt, shining her flashlight inside. The beam caught a shimmer of metal. "That's not natural," she said. "There's structure, pipes or conduits." Michael crouched beside her, his shadow blending with the damp rock. "You think it connects to the turbine system?" "Only one way to know." She stood and brushed the dirt from her knees. "But it's dangerous. Tides rise fast here. You've got maybe 40 minutes between shifts before this whole passage floods." Michael looked at the entrance again, that faint metallic glint calling to him. "Then, we'd better be quick." They gathered gear, flashlights, ropes, a portable sensor case Sarah kept in her pack. She worked in silence, efficient and precise, the way people do when their fear is buried under muscle memory. Before she followed Michael into the opening, she paused long enough to clip a small locator beacon to Buddy's collar. "If we're not out in 40 minutes, she said softly, "find help." Buddy gave a short, almost human bark in response. The tunnel sloped downward, slick with moss and cold water that ran in thin rivulets along the walls. The light from their lamps caught flecks of quartz and iron in the stone, making it shimmer like the inside of a shell. Every sound seemed amplified, the drip of water, the rasp of breath, the dull echo of their boots. The air smelled of old oil and rust. After a dozen yards, the passage widened into a chamber carved by hand. Thick conduits snaked across the walls, their insulation brittle but intact. In the center stood a sealed metal door, half buried under mineral deposits. It was circular, rimmed with bronze teeth, like a clock face half swallowed by time. Michael wiped away the grime, revealing faint letters. Tidal Core, Property of Croft Systems, 1987. Sarah let out a low whistle. "He wasn't just a hobbyist. Your uncle must have been a mechanical genius." Michael ran his hand along the door's edge. "He always said the sea gives if you listen. Maybe this is what he meant." The locking mechanism was old-fashioned. No keypad or switch, only a recessed socket shaped like a gear. Michael remembered the brass key from Julian's journal and pulled it from his jacket pocket. The metal was cold against his palm. When he fitted into the socket, it slid in with a sound so perfect it made Sarah inhale sharply. He turned it. The gears within groaned, reluctant after years of silence. Then came a deep mechanical sigh, followed by the low hum of pressure releasing. The door rolled open, revealing a narrow walkway suspended over a dark pool. The air that rushed out was warm, tinged with the mineral scent of seawater and ozone. They stepped inside. The space beyond was enormous, a cavern carved directly into the rock, its walls slick with condensation. A massive turbine dominated the chamber, its bronze blades turning slowly in the tidal current that surged through a grated channel beneath. The sound was hypnotic, a deep rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the bones. Each rotation sent a pulse of power along thick cables that ran upward into the ceiling, feeding the lighthouse above. Sarah's eyes widened in awe. He built a self-sustaining hydro generator. No fuel, no grid, just tides. Your uncle made the lighthouse immortal. Michael felt a swell of pride and something else. Melancholy, maybe. The man everyone called mad had done what whole corporations failed to do. Create a system that lived in harmony with the sea. He walked to the railing, watching the blades move. He built all this, and told no one. Maybe he didn't trust anyone to keep it safe. Sarah touched one of the pipes, feeling the vibration. These designs could be revolutionary, even now. Quiet energy, invisible to the world. Buddy paced near the threshold, his paws, clicking softly on the metal grating. The dog paused, ears pricking toward the far end of the chamber. A faint echo traveled through the walls, a hollow rhythmic pulse, slightly offbeat from the turbine's motion. Michael frowned. "You hear that?" Sarah adjusted her sensor. "It's strange, too regular for random noise." She glanced at him. "Could be a secondary chamber, or an access vent. Hard to say without diving gear." Michael stared into the black water swirling below. Whatever it is, Julian wanted it sealed. They spent the next hour mapping the space, Sarah recording data, Michael inspecting the machinery. It was pristine, as if maintained by unseen hands. Rust hadn't touched the main bolts. The bearings still gleamed faintly. It felt alive, like the lighthouse itself was breathing through these gears. As the tide began to turn, the water level rose, creeping up the sides of the turbine channel. Sarah checked her watch. "We need to go. This place floods when the tide changes." Reluctantly, Michael turned off his lamp and gave one last look at the turbine's steady rotation. "He gave the world light," he murmured, "and they called him crazy." When they emerged from the tunnel, the sun had dipped low, staining the horizon copper, and rose. Buddy bounded ahead, shaking off seawater, his fur glistening. Michael glanced back at the cliffside, where the secret door now lay hidden once more beneath shadow. He knew he'd seen only part of what his uncle had built. Something else was waiting, something deeper, tied to the strange pulse that echoed through the walls. That night, as they sat by the small fire inside the keeper's house, Sarah reviewed the sensor readings on her laptop. "Michael," she said, her voice low, "this data, it's not just power output. There's something else embedded in the frequency. A code, maybe. It repeats every 3 minutes." Michael looked up from where Buddy rested his head on his knee. "A code for what?" She hesitated. "I don't know yet. But if your uncle was trying to protect it, someone else might have been trying to find it." Outside, the tide surged once more against the rocks, steady and eternal, the heartbeat of the lighthouse, of the man who'd built it, and of the secret still buried beneath. The sky had shifted again. By late afternoon, the wind came in restless bursts that rattled the rusted railings of Gullbone Light. The sea below was a shifting patchwork of pewter and green, and the gulls flew low, crying warnings that no one could quite understand. Inside the lighthouse, the air hummed faintly with electricity from the turbine deep below, the same subtle pulse Michael had grown used to, a heartbeat he could almost feel through the soles of his boots. Buddy lay near the door, chin on his paws, watching the horizon with unblinking eyes. He always knew when something was coming before the weather ever showed it. Sarah was at the small table, cross-referencing data from her laptop with Julian's handwritten notes. The hum of the generator and the occasional crash of distant surf filled the silences between them. "The code is repeating again," she murmured, tracing the waveform on the screen with one finger. "Every 3 minutes on the dot. I've never seen anything like it. It's not a malfunction, it's deliberate." Michael leaned over her shoulder, frowning at the flickering graph. "So he encoded something into the turbine output? Maybe, or it's some kind of warning." Before he could answer, Buddy lifted his head sharply, ears pricking toward the sea. A low growl rolled out of his chest. Michael turned, instinct flaring. That same cold pulse in his veins he hadn't felt since the service. Through the fogged window, a speck of motion appeared offshore, a small private boat cutting through the rising chop, heading straight for the rocky inlet. Sarah stood, uneasy. "You expecting anyone?" "No," Michael said flatly. "No one even knows this place exists." Buddy barked once, deep and resonant. Michael grabbed his jacket and stepped out into the wind. The boat drew closer, engine whining as it forced against the tide. 3 figures stood aboard, one at the wheel, 2 near the bow. Even at a distance, Michael recognized the man in the tailored coat and expensive sunglasses, his cousin, Tyler Croft. Tyler had the same angular jawline as Michael, but none of the wear, none of the scars. His hair was perfectly styled, his smile thin and self-assured. He was the kind of man who mistook confidence for character, and charm for right. As the boat bumped against the rock landing, Tyler shouted over the wind, "You sure picked a lonely place to hide, Mike." His voice carried a mocking lilt, the sound of someone who still thought the world owed him attention. Michael said nothing. He simply waited as the men behind Tyler tied off the boat. 2 strangers in heavy coats, both too muscular to be tourists. One was thick-necked with a crooked nose and tattooed knuckles. The other, tall and pale with cold gray eyes that never stopped scanning. Hired muscle. Tyler jumped onto the rock, wincing as his polished shoes met the wet stone. "Guess you weren't kidding about inheriting this." "Dump," he said, grinning. "Looks worse than the pictures." "What do you want, Tyler?" Michael's voice was quiet but edged with steel. "Business." Tyler patted the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a folder sealed in plastic. "The family and I got to thinking, maybe we judged you too harshly. You're a man who could use some help, right? We've got investors interested in developing this place. Ecotourism, luxury cabins, that kind of thing. Sarah had followed him down the path and stood a few steps behind Michael. Ecotourism? She said dryly. On a rock that floods twice a day and has no infrastructure? Tyler's grin didn't falter. We'll fix that. I've got a contract here that'll take the property off your hands for a fair sum. 50,000 cash. More than generous for a place that's one storm away from sinking. Michael didn't reach for the folder. The wind tore at their clothes, carrying the scent of ozone and rain. You're not buying this place, he said. Tyler's smile faltered just slightly. Mike, I'm offering you a way out. You think the government's going to let you keep this after they find out what's down there? That generator or whatever it is? It's illegal, man. Dangerous. You could lose everything. How do you know about that? Sarah asked sharply. Tyler shrugged, feigning innocence. Word gets around. People talk. Some folks in town said a survey team came out here. Guess that's you, sweetheart. The gray-eyed man beside him gave a thin, humorless smirk. Not a lot of secrets stay buried these days. His voice was low, the kind that made ordinary sentences sound like threats. Michael's hand clenched. You don't belong here. Get back on your boat. Tyler stepped closer, lowering his voice. Come on, Mike. Don't make this hard. Sign the contract, take the money, and we'll be gone. Nobody gets hurt. He leaned forward, the charm slipping from his tone. But if you don't, well, my partners here have other ways of closing a deal. The tall man took a step forward, but before he could move again, Buddy growled, deep, resonant, primal. His hackles stood, teeth bared, eyes locked on Tyler's hand as it brushed the edge of the folder. The growl turned to a warning bark that echoed off the stone. Tyler flinched. Control your dog, Mike. Buddy's got good instincts, Michael said, his gaze never wavering. If he thinks you're a threat, you probably are. For a tense second, no one moved. Then a gust of wind ripped through the cliffside, scattering rain like shards of glass. Sarah grabbed Michael's arm, pointing to the horizon. Dark clouds were rising fast, rolling over the water with frightening speed. That's not just rain, she said. That's a nor'easter. We need to secure the lighthouse now. Tyler laughed, trying to shake the tension. Guess we picked a bad day for a business call. You picked the wrong day, Michael said. Leave now, or you won't make it back. But Tyler wasn't listening. He motioned to one of his men, the tattooed one, who started toward the lighthouse steps. Let's at least have a look at this miracle machine he's hiding. Maybe take a few photos for our investors. Buddy lunged forward before Michael could stop him, planting himself between the man and the steps, teeth bared in a silent snarl. The man froze, hand halfway to his jacket. Call him off, Tyler shouted. Michael's voice was calm, deadly certain. Touch that control panel, and he won't stop next time. The wind howled louder, waves slamming against the rocks below. The two hired men looked at each other. Even they could feel the storm coming too fast, too strong. The gray-eyed one muttered something under his breath, glancing nervously at the black horizon. We need to move, now. Tyler's arrogance cracked, replaced by fear. Fine. You win, Mike. Keep your rock. But when this storm takes it, don't expect me to come looking. He turned, slipping on the wet stone as another gust hit. The three men scrambled back to the boat, fighting the wind. By the time the engine roared to life, the first sheets of rain were already falling, sharp as needles. The boat vanished into the fog, swallowed by the rising storm. Michael stood in silence, breathing hard, rain streaming down his face. Sarah touched his arm. You think they'll be back? He watched the waves crash against the rocks, each one heavier than the last. If the sea doesn't take them, they will. Buddy pressed against his leg, fur-drenched, gaze fixed on the dark horizon. The turbine's faint hum beneath the floor had changed. Slower now, deeper, almost like it was listening. As the wind roared and lightning flickered over the water, Michael whispered, Let them come. The sea's on our side tonight. And far below, deep in the tidal chamber, something shifted. A metallic resonance that echoed up through the stone, merging with the growl of the storm. The storm arrived with no warning, as if the sea had simply decided to reclaim everything that belonged to it. By dusk, the world around Goulbone Light was nothing but motion and noise. Rain slicing sideways, wind howling through the iron railings, waves colliding against rock with a violence that shook the ground. The beacon above the tower swung wildly, its light slicing through the mist in desperate arcs before vanishing into darkness again. Michael had weathered storms before, both on ships and on land, but nothing like this. This storm had a voice. Buddy barked at the thunder, pacing the small room, fur slicked with spray that forced its way through the cracks in the window. Sarah was by the control panel, her laptop flashing erratic readings. Her hair, usually neat under her cap, clung damply to her temples. "The output's spiking," she shouted over the roar. "The turbine's running faster than it should. It's drawing power from the storm." Michael was already moving. He strapped down loose equipment, the muscles in his jaw working as he scanned the walls for leaks. "If the surge hits the main grid, the transformer will blow," he yelled back. Then, beneath the thunder, came another sound, so low it was almost felt rather than heard. A deep hum rising from the stone floor, vibrating through their boots. Buddy froze mid-step, ears twisting toward the sound. Then he lifted his muzzle and howled, long, unbroken, mournful. The sound threaded itself through the vibration beneath them, harmonizing in a way that turned Michael's blood cold. Sarah stared at the seismic monitor. The waveform danced erratically, peaks forming perfect repetitions. "That's the same frequency," she said, voice trembling. "Julian's warning pattern. It's repeating. When the stone sings, the tower is breaking." Michael's breath caught. "How much time do we have?" She didn't answer. Another flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening crack. The entire lighthouse lurched, the floor pitching as a section of the upper wall tore free. Wood splintered, glass shattered. A beam crashed through the ceiling, narrowly missing Sarah. Buddy lunged, teeth clamping onto her sleeve, pulling her backward just before another support beam slammed into the floor where she had stood. "Downstairs!" Michael shouted. "We go now!" They stumbled toward the trap door leading to the lower stairwell, the air thick with salt and dust. As Michael pulled the hatch open, wind tore through the broken windows like a living thing shrieking. Then came another sound, human, panicked. A voice shouting through the storm. "Help! Mike!" Michael froze. The shout was faint, but unmistakable. Tyler. Against every instinct screaming for survival, he turned back toward the outer deck. Through the sheets of rain, he saw three figures, Tyler and the two hired men, clinging to the twisted remains of the landing dock. Their boat had been smashed against the rocks, fragments already being devoured by the waves. "Idiot!" Michael muttered, then grabbed a coil of rope. Sarah caught his arm. "You can't go out there. I'm not letting him die out there, not like this." He tied the rope to the main beam and stepped into the chaos. The wind hit him like a wall, nearly tearing him off his feet. The rope strained against his waist as he fought forward, one step at a time, rain blinding him. Buddy followed at his side, every muscle tense, claws scrabbling for grip on the slick stone. He reached Tyler first. His cousin's face was pale, his expensive coat soaked and shredded, the arrogance long gone. "Mike, please, grab the rope," Michael bellowed. Tyler obeyed, coughing seawater, while the others clung behind him. One of the hired men had a bleeding gash across his forehead. The other's hand was twisted at a wrong angle. They were all ghosts in the strobe of lightning. Another crack split the air, this time from above. The lighthouse's top frame was twisting, the great iron lens shifting under its own weight. The hum from below had grown louder, resonant, almost like the rock itself was moaning. "Move!" Michael shoved Tyler forward, half dragging him toward the open hatch. A wooden beam snapped loose above them, swinging down like a guillotine. Buddy lunged again, ramming his body into Tyler's knees, forcing him sideways just as the beam crashed down where his head had been. The sound was enormous, metal against stone, the howl of something breaking. They stumbled into the stairwell, Michael pulling the hatch closed behind them. "Down! Go down!" he ordered, his voice raw. The group descended the narrow steps, light flickering from the emergency lanterns as dust rained down. Sarah was waiting at the lower level, already pulling open the heavy stone door to the turbine chamber. "Inside, now!" They shoved through one by one. The moment the last person crossed the threshold, Sarah slammed the locking wheel shut. The thick stone sealed with a groan, just as another explosion of noise rolled through the lighthouse above. The ground shuddered. A wave of vibration hit them like a heartbeat made of thunder. For a moment, There was only silence, then the deep, endless rumble of the sea, muffled by the earth. The lights flickered, then steadied. The air in the chamber was warm and metallic, humming with energy from the turbine. The great bronze blades below still turned, but now their rhythm was slower, steadier, almost soothing. Michael leaned against the wall, drenched, breathing hard. Tyler sat on the floor, trembling, his hand pressed against a fresh cut on his cheek. He looked up at Michael, shame and gratitude fighting behind his eyes. You saved me." Michael met his gaze but said nothing. Buddy padded over, shaking himself dry before lying down beside Tyler, as if deciding that the man had suffered enough. The cousin hesitated, then reached out to scratch the dog's ear. Buddy accepted it, closing his eyes. Sarah knelt near the control panel, watching the monitors stabilize. "We're safe for now. The lighthouse won't survive the full storm, but this chamber, Julian built it like a vault." Michael nodded slowly. He built it for this. For a while, no one spoke. The roar above was distant now, like an angry god muffled by miles of water and stone. Then Sarah looked at the screens again, frowning. "The turbine readings are changing again. The code, it's rewriting itself. Look." Michael joined her. The repeating pattern of numbers was shifting, rearranging. Then the letters appeared. "Keep the light below." Sarah's voice was a whisper. He knew this would happen. Michael placed a hand on the console, feeling the vibration beneath his palm, the pulse of the machine, the sea, maybe even the old man's will. "He left us a backup," he said softly. "A second beacon." Outside, unseen, the top of the lighthouse gave one final groan before collapsing into the sea. The glass lens shattered, the iron frame folded, and the light above was extinguished. But in the depths of the rock, the turbine glowed faintly golden, casting ripples of reflected light along the chamber walls. Sarah exhaled, half laugh, half disbelief. He really made the light eternal. Michael sank to the floor beside Buddy, his hand resting on the dog's shoulder. "Not eternal," he murmured, "just long enough." They sat together in the hum of the hidden light, the storm raging above them, the legacy of Julian Croft alive beneath the waves. A secret still burning, unseen but unbroken. The storm had begun to fade, but the sea was far from calm. Outside the thick stone walls of the underground chamber, the waves still roared like a wounded beast. The world above, where the lighthouse once stood, was gone, replaced by mist and ruin. In the dim glow of the turbine's light, Michael leaned over the communication console, adjusting dials that hadn't been touched in decades. The machine crackled faintly, alive again after years of silence. Beside him, Buddy sat motionless, his sable coat still damp, eyes fixed on the flickering sonar display. Sarah stood across the room, scanning the turbine's data feed. Her hair, now loose and tangled, shimmered in the low light like burnished copper. The exhaustion on her face didn't hide her determination. She moved with the focus of someone who refused to let fear dictate her next move. "Power output stabilized," she said, glancing toward Michael. "Whatever Julian built, it's still feeding off the tide, but there's another signal layered in the current." Michael adjusted a frequency dial, the old speaker emitting a distorted hum, then a series of rhythmic beeps. It wasn't random. "That's sonar," he murmured. Sarah frowned. "You think it's Coast Guard? Maybe they picked up our distress beacon?" He shook his head slowly. "No, listen to the pattern." The rhythm was too precise, too heavy. It repeated in cycles, each pulse lower and deeper. "That's industrial sonar, mapping grade. It's coming from a vessel nearby." Buddy growled, ears twitching with each pulse. The screen flickered, showing a faint moving shadow beneath the waves. Massive, slow, metallic. Sarah's eyes widened. "It's a submersible?" she whispered. "But why would anyone be this close after a nor'easter?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Because they're not rescuers." He switched to a different channel, adjusting the wavelength until faint voices filtered through the static. A man's tone, flat, businesslike, cut through. "Docking coordinates confirmed. Cargo release in 30 minutes. Maintain silence until the bay doors open." Sarah's stomach turned. "They're dumping something." Michael stared at the sonar image, the shadow moving closer toward the shallow ridge east of the island. Tyler said he had investors. he muttered. Industrial waste. Offshore dumping. That's what this is. Sarah's expression hardened. They're using your family's island as cover. He exhaled through clenched teeth. Not if I can help it. Buddy barked once, sharp, as if in agreement. Michael crouched beside him, scratching behind the dog's ear. Looks like we've got one more job, boy. He turned back to the console and pulled a rusted metal lever from the side panel, revealing an older brass control board, one Sarah hadn't noticed before. What's that? She asked. The original foghorn circuit, he said. Julian used it for navigation warnings, but it's wired through the turbine. It can project a low-frequency tone across half the bay. Sarah's brows knit together as she pieced it together. You're thinking of using it as a decoy signal. Michael nodded. If I mimic their sonar frequency, I can draw that sub toward the reef. Those rocks are older than sin. One wrong turn, and they'll rip her hull open. That's dangerous, Sarah said. If they realize what you're doing. They won't, he interrupted quietly. They'll think it's an automated relay. And if they do realize, he gave a small, humorless smile. Then they'll find out the hard way that this lighthouse can still fight back. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. I'll monitor their position. You'll need to time the pulse with the tidal shift, or the echo will reveal the ruse. He began tuning the foghorn frequency manually, the sound building low in the chamber, deep, ancient, almost mournful. Buddy's ears twitched again, his gaze following the sonar display like he understood the plan. You stay close, Michael said softly to the dog. No heroics this time. Sarah took her station beside the radar screen. The sub's changing course, she said after a moment. It's turning toward the island. Michael adjusted the signal strength, synchronizing the tone to match the vessel's sonar ping. The old foghorn boomed once, then again, its echo rolling through the sea like the call of some ancient leviathan. The entire structure vibrated with the sound. Buddy barked in rhythm, tail stiff, his paws pressed against the console. They're responding, Sarah said, tension in her voice. They've slowed speed. It's working. For nearly 10 minutes, the dance continued, the foghorn pulse drawing the submersible closer, the sonar signature tightening on the screen like a predator closing in on bait. But then the radio crackled again, this time with sharper voices. Unidentified frequency detected near sight. Adjust heading north by 5 degrees. Confirm interference source. Sarah's eyes snapped to Michael. They're suspicious. He gritted his teeth. Not yet. He increased the foghorn's pitch slightly, weaving the false echo deeper into the reef's signal reflection. The sound grew darker, resonant, like the voice of the sea itself. Then came a sharp blip on the sonar. The vessel had entered the reef's boundary. Michael held his breath, fingers tight on the lever. Come on, he whispered, just a little closer. Sarah's gaze flicked between the monitor and the tide chart. They're almost over the trench, 200 meters, 100, and then the signal spiked, followed by chaos. A burst of static erupted through the speakers, then a grinding roar that even the stone walls couldn't hide. Sarah flinched. Impact! The sonar image shuddered, showing the shadow split apart in 2 sections. The low rumble of collapsing metal rolled through the sea, carried by the current. Then silence. Michael released the lever, exhaling slowly. His knuckles were white. That's done, he said softly. They won't be dumping anything now. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Only the turbine's steady hum filled the space, blending with the rhythmic lap of water against the rocks outside. Then Sarah turned, eyes unreadable. You realize what that means, right? There'll be an investigation. The Coast Guard will come. They'll find this place. Michael nodded. Let them. Julian's secret isn't a crime. It's a warning. And maybe it's time someone listened. Buddy gave a soft whine, pressing his head against Michael's knee. Michael smiled faintly, running his hand through the dog's fur. We did good, didn't we, boy? Sarah approached, her voice quieter now. You're not afraid of what happens next? He looked at the dim golden glow of the turbine chamber, the light dancing against the stone like a heartbeat. Fear doesn't stop the tide, he said. You either face it or you drown. Buddy wagged his tail once, a single deliberate motion, like an oath kept. Outside, the sea rolled and sighed, carrying away the last traces of the wreck and the darkness that had followed it. The lighthouse might have fallen, but its keeper, and his loyal friend, had ensured that its purpose lived on. When morning finally broke, it came slowly, pale and trembling, like a child unsure of its welcome. The sea was calm again, its fury spent, leaving behind a glassy silence that stretched to the horizon. Where the lighthouse once stood, only a broken ring of stone remained, crowned by a single twisted beam jutting toward the sky like a monument. The storm had taken almost everything, but not the light beneath. Deep below, the turbine's pulse still glowed, steady as a heartbeat. Michael stood on the cliffs above the collapsed tower, his boots crunching over wet debris. His face was lined and unshaven, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. Salt clung to his beard and hair, streaking it silver. Beside him, Buddy nosed through the rubble, tail low, cautious but curious. The German shepherd had a limp now, not serious, just a reminder of the night he threw himself into falling debris to save a man who'd never deserved it. Michael reached down to pat his shoulder. "You did good, partner," he said quietly. "You kept the light alive." From below the cliffs came the deep rumble of engines. 2 Coast Guard vessels had anchored offshore, their hulls gleaming white against the bruised sea. Figures in orange suits were hauling debris, ropes, and metal fragments from the shallows. One of them waved toward Michael before trudging up the slope. She was tall, broad-shouldered, her face framed by a wind-burned halo of auburn hair. The name tag on her uniform read, "Lieutenant Maren Holt." She removed her cap as she approached. "Mr. Croft?" she asked, her voice firm but respectful. "That's me," he said. "You found the wreck?" "We did." Her tone hardened slightly. The submersible's hull was crushed against the reef. Preliminary report says they were carrying sealed chemical drums. Industrial-grade waste. Illegal under maritime law. Michael nodded grimly. "Then Julian was right to guard this place." "Julian Croft," she repeated, pulling a waterproof tablet from her pack. "Your uncle's name came up in the archives. He was a Navy engineer, wasn't he? Classified sonar research?" "Until they shut it down," Michael said. "He kept the last beacon alive when no one else cared." Maren's expression softened. "You and your team did good work. If you hadn't sent that old distress frequency, we might have missed the sub completely." She glanced down at Buddy, who sat at attention beside Michael, fur ruffled by the wind. "And I hear your partner here had a paw in saving lives too." Buddy's ears twitched, and he let out a soft, polite bark, as if to confirm. Sarah appeared from the tunnel entrance below, her blue jacket tied at the waist, hair pulled back. The exhaustion that had hung over her for days was gone, replaced by quiet relief. "I gave the Coast Guard your uncle's notebooks," she said. "They'll confirm everything. His data, the tidal generator, even the signal protocols. Julian's work wasn't madness. It was ahead of its time." Maren nodded. "Our technical division already ran diagnostics on your turbine. The readings are extraordinary. A fully sustainable power loop. No fuel, no emissions. The Navy's going to want to know how it still functions after 30 years. Michael gave a half smile. "Maybe because it wasn't built by a committee." That drew a faint laugh from her, the kind of weary humor shared by people who'd seen too much. Then her tone shifted, more formal. "Mr. Croft, the Department of Maritime Conservation and the Navy want to designate Gullbone as a protected marine site. We'll be rebuilding an observation station here to monitor the ecosystem and the generator. But we need someone who understands both." She paused. "We'd like you to stay on as caretaker." Michael turned toward the sea. The sun had broken through the clouds, scattering golden ribbons across the water. He thought of Julian's handwriting. Keep the light below. He thought of all the years he'd spent drifting, fixing other men's engines, waiting for something worth staying for. And he thought of Buddy sitting beside him through every loss, every storm. He looked back at Maren. "I'll do it," he said, "on one condition." Her brow arched. "Name it." Michael placed his hand on Buddy's head. "He gets a badge." Maren blinked. "A badge?" "Yeah," Michael said, dead serious. "He's been through war, storms, and enough miracles to earn a uniform. If I'm caretaker, he's the K-9 Sea Guard." For a moment, Maren just stared. Then, to Sarah's surprise, the officer broke into a grin. "I think we can arrange that." She unclipped her radio, murmured something into it, and a few minutes later, a young sailor jogged up the slope carrying a small box. Marin opened it, revealing a gleaming bronze insignia, the shape of an anchor wrapped in a laurel. "It's a ceremonial unit pin," she said, "technically for commendations, but I don't think anyone will mind." She crouched in front of Buddy and pinned it gently to the dog's worn leather collar. "For valor," she said quietly. Buddy wagged his tail once, then sat proudly, chest out, eyes bright. The sailors nearby broke into spontaneous applause. Even Sarah smiled, clapping lightly. "Well," she said softly, "looks like we've got our first honorary sea guardian." Michael knelt beside the dog. "You hear that, boy? You're official now." Buddy licked his cheek once, solemn as a priest. Later that day, as cleanup crews worked and the sun climbed higher, Marin led Michael and Sarah down to the remains of the generator chamber. The turbine still spun steadily, casting soft amber light across the rock. A Navy engineer named Chief Warrant Officer Darius Quinn, a lean man with a lined face and silver-streaked hair, stood beside the main console, clipboard in hand. He nodded, curtly when they approached. "Hell of a piece of work," he said, voice gravelly. "Your uncle was either a genius or a lunatic, maybe both." "Runs in the family," Michael replied. Quinn's smile was brief. "We'll get a protection dome built over this chamber, reroute the outputs into the Coast Guard grid, should power the whole northern relay chain." He looked at Buddy, then added, "Dog saved my nephew's life back in Kuwait. Glad to see some things never change." When evening came, the Coast Guard ships pulled away, leaving the island quiet again. The air smelled clean, rain-washed, alive. Sarah packed her instruments, preparing to return to the mainland, but paused at the cliff's edge. "You'll stay then?" Michael nodded. "This place isn't done teaching me." "You'll make a good keeper," she said, smiling faintly. "Just don't let the sea turn you into a ghost." He watched her go until her figure disappeared into the mist. Then he turned back toward the water. Buddy sat beside him, the bronze badge glinting softly in the fading light. The waves rolled in, calm and endless, whispering against the rocks like a heartbeat. Michael took a deep breath of salt and wind. "Looks like it's just us again," he murmured. "Let's keep the light, Buddy." The dog pressed close, eyes fixed on the horizon, steady, watchful, eternal. And as the last of the sun dipped below the sea, a faint glow rose from beneath the waves. The turbine's pulse, alive and golden. The soul of the lighthouse still burning where no storm could reach. The sea was calm again, the kind of stillness that only comes after a year of storms. Gullbone Light stood proud against the horizon, no longer the lonely ruin it once was. The new tower rose from the same foundation, its metal ribs gleaming beneath a silver morning sun. Wind turbines hummed softly nearby, their blades catching the breeze like slow-moving wings. Below, the tide generators thrummed in rhythm, feeding clean power through the veins of the new research station that now crowned the island. Michael Croft stood on the restored balcony, leaning on the steel railing. His brown jacket flapped lightly in the wind, the same one he had worn through the worst of it, patched now, but still sturdy. The deep creases on his face had softened with time, though the silver in his beard had spread. There was peace in his eyes, the kind that only comes after a man has fought all his battles and learned not every victory requires a weapon. Beside him, Buddy lay with his front paws crossed, chin resting between them. The old German shepherd had grayed around the muzzle, but his gaze was steady, still alert. The bronze badge, K9 Sea Guard, gleamed faintly on his collar. Visitors often whispered that the dog seemed to sense the tides, lifting his head just before a shift in current, as if listening to the ocean's pulse. Below, a group of students in bright safety vests gathered near the generator entrance. They were led by Dr. Naomi Ellis, the station's new marine biologist, a woman in her early 40s with soft brown skin and sharp sea-green eyes. Her dark curls were tied back, streaked faintly with gray from years spent in coastal labs and deep-sea expeditions. Naomi spoke with a calm authority that made people listen. "These turbines are self-regulating," she told the students, gesturing to the exposed cables. "Mr. Croft's uncle designed the core mechanism, decades ahead of his time. What you're standing on is living proof that innovation doesn't always need noise. Sometimes the quietest minds leave the loudest legacy." Michael smiled faintly as her words drifted upward on the wind. He had grown to respect Naomi. She was one of those people who carried her purpose lightly, neither boastful nor timid, just steady. She'd come to Gullbone 6 months ago to study marine acoustics and had since turned the island into a living classroom. Under her supervision, young researchers mapped the underwater soundscapes Julian Croft had once written about, the songs of the ocean. Buddy's ears flicked. He rose, padded to the stairway, and barked once, deep and resonant. Michael followed his gaze toward the harbor below, where a small mailboat was approaching, its white hull bright against the blue. "Our supply run," he murmured, "right on schedule." When the boat docked, Jed Turner climbed out, the same fisherman who'd once ferried Michael to the island. Time had bent his shoulders, but not his spirit. His weather-beaten face still carried the same dry humor, though now there was fondness in his eyes. "Got a parcel for you, keeper," he said, handing over a waterproof envelope. "Came through the coast office this morning. No return address." Michael took it with a nod. "Thanks, Jed. Coffee's on if you want to stay a bit." "Tempting," Jed said, glancing toward the lighthouse. "But the tide waits for no man." He tipped his hat to Buddy. "Good to see the Admiral's still on duty." Buddy wagged his tail once, dignified as ever. When Jed left, Michael opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter and an old photograph. The picture was sun-faded, 5 people standing before a farmhouse porch, smiling. Julian Croft was there, younger, eyes bright beneath his cap. Beside him stood Michael's parents, and in the corner, a boy, Tyler, no more than 10, grinning proudly with his arm around a puppy. Buddy's ancestor, perhaps. Michael unfolded the letter. The handwriting was rough but familiar. "Michael, I know there's no undoing what I did, but I wanted you to know I've been trying to make it right. The state gave me community service, not a long sentence. I've been helping clean the coast near Bangor, where the waste from those drums washed up. Every piece I pull from the water feels like one apology. I found this photo in Grandma's attic, figured it belonged with the man who actually earned it. You were right about Uncle Julian. He wasn't crazy. He saw something worth saving, and you carried that light when the rest of us couldn't even see it. Tell Buddy I'm sorry, too. For everything." "Tyler!" Michael stood in silence, the letter fluttering slightly in the breeze. He felt no bitterness now, only a quiet understanding. The storm had changed them all, some more painfully than others. He refolded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Guess even lost sailors find their way home," he murmured. That evening, the island gathered for the dedication ceremony. Flags snapped in the steady wind. The Coast Guard band had sent a small trio, a trumpet, a drum, and a clarinet, their music echoing softly over the waves. Marin Holt, now promoted to commander, stood at the podium, her auburn hair tied back, her medals gleaming. "Today," she said, "we honor not only innovation, but vigilance, the kind that endures in silence." She gestured to the new bronze plaque mounted beside the entrance. The inscription read, "Buddy, the Silent Watcher. In every storm, a light remains." Michael stood beside her, eyes glistening as the crowd applauded. Buddy sat proudly, ears perked, tail thumping against the wooden deck. After the speeches, Naomi handed Michael a small velvet case. "From the research team," she said. "We thought it was only fitting." Inside was a compass, old brass, polished to a soft gleam. On the lid was engraved a single line, "Keep the light below." Michael closed it gently, his throat tightening. "Thank you," he said. He'd have liked this. When night came, the guests departed, leaving the island quiet once more. The stars unfolded across the sky, mirrored by the shimmering path of the sea below. Michael sat on the rebuilt stone steps. Buddy stretched out beside him, his head resting on his master's boot. "You know," Michael said softly, "we're not rich, Buddy, never were." He looked toward the horizon, where the beacon's new light swept slowly across the water. "But we kept the light. That's enough." Buddy huffed in quiet agreement, eyes half closed, content. The rhythmic pulse of the tide mixed with the low hum of the turbines below. A song older than any man, older even than regret. The beacon turned once more, casting its gold across the waves, and for an instant, Michael thought he saw it, Julian's shadow standing in the light, hand raised in silent salute. Then it was gone, leaving only sea, sky, and peace. In the end, the story of Michael and Buddy wasn't about the sea, the storm, or even the lighthouse. It was about what survives when everything else is stripped away: faith, loyalty, and the quiet courage to keep standing when the waves come again. Gullbone Light was rebuilt, yes, but more importantly, so were the hearts of those who once forgot what light truly meant. Sometimes God doesn't send thunder or fire to save us. Sometimes He sends a dog who refuses to leave our side, a storm that breaks what needs rebuilding, or a flicker of light that reminds us miracles aren't distant. They live in our hands, our choices, and the people who love us when we don't deserve it. And maybe that's the greatest miracle of all. Not the light we build, but the one we become when we choose kindness over bitterness, service over silence, faith over fear. So, tonight as you close this story, take a moment to look at the light around you. Maybe it's a friend, a pet, or your own heartbeat still strong after every storm. If this story touched you, please share it. Leave a comment about what your light is, and subscribe for more tales of courage, loyalty, and redemption. May God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and light, the kind that never fades, even in the darkest sea.